Nightreign is vastly different to Elden Ring, but the one thing that remains the same is the Fel Oben is going to keep your ego in check. Here are 10 major mistakes and a bunch of tips and tricks I learned whilst clearing all the nightlords. Let's go! So firstly, let me know any tips and tricks you have in the comments down below so we can all help each other out. And secondly, I'm going to tell you how you can unlock the 2 unlockable characters here first, because that was the first thing that I wanted to try and do when I started playing. That is Duchess and Revenant. Now, firstly, you can get Duchess after you have cleared the Tricephalus expedition. It's the very first expedition. Once you've beaten that Nightlord, you'll get an item called the Old Pocket Watch. You'll need to give this to the priestess at the Round Table Hold. After you have done so, a cutscene will play out, and after that cutscene, the Duchess will be available for you to play. The Revenant does take a little bit more work. Now, if you talk to the Small Jar Bazaar, the jar vendor at the Round Table Hold, and purchase the Besmirched Frame, this is at the very bottom of his inventory list, you'll then need to take this to the Phantom of a young woman in the east wing of the Round Table Hold. There'll be a Phantom there of the Revenant. You need to interact with her, and you'll be then transported back to the tutorial area and have to defeat Revenant and her 3 spirit summons, which is quite challenging to say the least. You will definitely want to take a nightfarer that you are most comfortable with, preferably one that has high HP. Something to note here is that while all 3 summons are active, Revenant is actually less aggressive, and the summons themselves are also less aggressive, so the fight is a little bit more paced out, whereas the more summons you take down, the more aggressive she becomes, the more attacks she uses, and the more attacks the remaining summons use as well. But good luck, and once you have cleared this fight, you will have the Revenant unlocked for you to play, and you'll have the full list of available nightfarers. Matchmaking is the main boss of Elden Ring Nightreign and finding 2 people to play with, and the game can even prevent you from playing with certain people regardless of what passwords you enter. So just to explain how this system all works. There is no cross-play or cross-platform play here, so you will have to be on the same platform. Now, for the most part, you'll be using a password to play with people. Obviously, you want to enter the same password, case sensitive, as whoever you want to play with. However, in some regard, it won't actually matchmake you with the people you are trying to play with for 2 reasons. Firstly, the Shifting Earth events. These are the events that unlock after you defeat certain nightlords that are, say, the Crater event that creates that massive fissure in Limveld, or the city, the Rotted Woods, or the mountain top. These events, if the person you are trying to matchmake with has not seen them before or hasn't had them unlocked, the matchmaker, regardless of the password you enter, won't allow you to enter a match together. And the same is said for Remembrances. Now, only one of your 3 potential party members can have an active remembrance. These are the individual Nightfarer storylines that you have to enter, and in a lot of these cases, you'll have a personal objective that you have to go and get inside Limveld while you are actively on an expedition. If you and your people that you're trying to match with have active remembrances, even if they're the same remembrance, it won't matchmake you with them. Only one person can have a remembrance active, and you have to make sure you've both unlocked the shifting event that you're trying to do and matchmake with. There is one exception to this whole rule, is that you can manually invite people to a group before you have actually matchmaked together. So by using, for example, Steam, you can then use Steam invites to create a group, which will be shown in the top right-hand corner of your group. Now, the exception here is that whoever starts the matchmaking, like whoever is the group leader, their Shifting Earth event and their remembrance they have active will take precedence over the other 2 members, and their like Limveld expedition is what you will see, and that's the way you can get around these specific mechanics. But also, if you do have a Shifting Earth active and you're just using passwords or you're trying to matchmake, you can actually sleep in the bed at the Round Table Hold to remove that Shifting Earth event. And if you have a remembrance active, you can actually turn it off by re-interacting with the journal and say postpone remembrance. That'll then turn that off, so you'll then just be completely open and be able to matchmake with anyone because you don't have any custom events and things happening. I do hope this is something they change after launch, so this information may become redundant, but at the moment that is where it currently stands. So now that you're actually in an expedition with your friends and you've figured out the matchmaking, what sort of nightfarers should you bring? I think there is really 2 specific archetypes in Nightreign that you have to have more or less on most runs, unless you're like god tier players, and then there's some exceptions to that rule. Firstly, you want a melee frontline / tank sort of character. You know, typically this is, say, a guardian because of their shield, or the raider because of their giant health pool. Even the executor here isn't bad. Wilder fits this to some degree as well, but someone that can tank a lot of the damage and hopefully have the boss focus them and create that sort of threat that the boss boss wants to target. The second is some sort of a support. This is typically Iron Eye or to some regard Recluse, but Iron Eye is absolutely, as the game stands right now, the best option here. Revenant also fits this role. Now, what you want to do with this role is have some sort of a ranged character that can revive from ranged, so then it's much easier to revive, so you're not actually dragging the boss over there and also tanking that damage yourself, because it does get quite messy trying to revive and the boss is on top of you. But also it helps spread out the arena so you're both not all cramped together and say you all make the same mistake and you all die at once. But then the third role, I say, is pretty flexible. You can really have anything here. Like Duchess obviously fits here, Executor, really anything can fit in this sort of third spot. But I do recommend to have at least a tanking sort of front line with high HP that can make a few mistakes and not immediately go down, and then just be able to have enough health pool to be able to poise through some of these boss attacks to revive or just kind of stay alive. And then you've got that flexibility role where you can have anything, and then some sort of a ranged is typically the best setup that I've had and had the most success with. And just while we're on the topic of what to play, if you are wondering which characters are easier and how you can get the most out of your experience while you're learning the mechanics, I would avoid Recluse, Revenant, Executor, and the Duchess until you're really comfortable with the mechanics of Nightreign and the combat system, as they're often the more higher skill characters that require a bit more finesse and understanding of the game's systems as well as their skills. But regardless of the character that you're going to play, I will have a Nightfarer guide explaining every single detail you could possibly want to know about them. I'll link one of those guides here. Which one? I don't know. You'll have to click it and see. The next mistake is also on the topic of these Nightfarers. Now, similar to Elden Ring, all of these Nightfarers have a starting attribute scaling of what attribute is their strongest or weakest and vice versa. That's why you see certain characters that have much higher HP, much higher FP or mind, but then also certain amounts of stamina. You can view all of this in the visual codex. You can look at the characters, see a little bit of a description about them. You can also see what their weapon preference is. Now, that doesn't just mean that that Nightfarer likes using that weapon. It does in a way, but it also means that that specific weapon type or types will appear more often when you're on an expedition and playing as that Nightfarer. So say, for example, if you're playing as the Raider, they love colossal weapons. You're going to see a whole lot of colossal weapons while you're on that run. But then conversely, if you're playing as the Iron Eye, who has a weapon preference for bows, you're going to see a lot of bows when you're looking at those boss rewards. Now, this is all important to think about when you understand looking at those attributes and which is their highest, because while you're in the visual codex, you can actually look at all of the armaments that are available in the game, and you'll notice that they also have scaling for all of the attributes the same as they did in Elden Ring. Now, familiarizing yourself with the weapon categories that you want to use and those weapon specific effects, but also the scaling is quite important. For example, if you're playing a character like Executor who has S tier dexterity and arcane, you definitely 100% of the time want to be using a weapon that has high dexterity scaling, like the katana that they start with or the katanas that you can find on the run. You definitely don't want to be leaning into, say, a colossal weapon that has, really high strength scaling, because you're just not going to get the value out of that for that sort of a class. If you want to look at a colossal weapon that has high strength scaling, you want to look at a Nightfarer like the Raider that has really high strength, so you can get the most value out of the damage that that weapon can do, and their also kit is based around playing with that weapon. Because of this, I do recommend to spend time at the sparring ground understanding what the weapons do, what their effects are, what their weapon scaling is, so you understand what you should be looking for that Nightfarer, or you could just go and watch my guides that I have put out. Also, if you like what we do here, consider hitting that like button or subscribing, or the membership program. For just $1, you can get early access to videos like this and all of my other guides, build videos, and those cheeky long form essays we do. Plus, there are other benefits like members only channels in the Discord, merch, and more. So if you like what we do here, please consider hitting that join button or subscribing, as it helps me more than you know. But enough of that, back to the video. Another mistake you can make, one, is trying to do expeditions solo, because they are very hard, but there is a reason to do solo expeditions, and that is actually around the Remembrances. So something that I learned pretty early on my time during the review period and doing these Remembrances is, as I mentioned earlier in the video, you can't matchmake with people when you have active Remembrances. Like, it gets a little bit funny. Now, a lot of these Remembrances, most of the time when you have to go into Limveld and complete something, typically you arrive in Limveld, there'll be a boss that you'll have to defeat, typically pretty easy, and then you collect an item, and then regardless of whether you beat the Nightlord at the end of that run or you lose on day one, you'll take take that item back with you to the round table hold. What I've actually found is to avoid some of the matchmaking niggling issues and everything, and I actually had quite a lot of success with that personal objective to collect that item, is to just do a solo expedition, enter that, level myself up a little bit, hit like level 3 or 4, get a decent weapon upgrade, and then go and beat whatever that boss is, collect the item that is needed, and then you just need to get to the end of day 1 and die to that end of day 1 boss. That will fail your run, and then you'll go back to the round table hold with that item, and then you can then progress the Remembrance. But the reason to progress these Remembrances outside of their story really is to upgrade the Nightfarers. Some of their best relics and also a unique chalice, which is what you put those relics into, come from the Remembrances. Every Nightfarer has a chalice or vessel that you use for these relics that has 2 specific colors and then a white relic slot. That white slot, you can put any color relic in, and the only way to get these vessels for the relics is by going through their Remembrances. Typically, it's around like the 4th or 5th step for all the Nightfarers. It's a little bit different depending on whichever Nightfarer it is, but it's around that point. So you don't have to get too far to get these really good chalices, but also as you progress through that Remembrance, their best relics are all uniques that you get from their Remembrances. So your character that you're playing as will get significantly more stronger, and you'll be able to go into these runs with specific skill buffs or other things that are really unique to that Nightfarer. Now, if you're stuck on a Remembrance step that isn't like one that you can actively enter that has an objective, typically you just need to defeat a Nightlord with that Nightfarer. There's a couple of exceptions. For example, the Iron Eye, its very last step, you do need to beat the Nightlord themselves with Iron Eye, but some of these you can sort of tell if you read that last entry page if you have to do something specific. But for the most part, if you're stuck on a step that doesn't have an active Remembrance that you can enter, you just need to defeat a Nightlord, and then you'll get that next step for you to progress. Now, we did just touch on relics, but there's a couple of things I do want to mention. The jar vendor at the round table hold does update his stock as you defeat the Nightlords, and will sell you some great relics specific to each of the Nightfarers that have a skill upgrade for those specific characters. So whenever you defeat a Nightlord, go back to the jar vendor and check his stock, as it will have updated to have new things. Fun fact, by the way, if you beat the Fell Omen in the tutorial, you can get a unique relic that will increase your attack power when you switch weapons, as well as give you a little bit of extra vigor, which is your HP. Now, if you failed to beat the Fell Omen when you originally did the tutorial, don't worry, you can go back and do it. If you go to the visual codex, click the guide option, then that first option there will allow you to press square on PS5 or whatever it is for your platform, and you can then replay the tutorial and have another crack at the Fell Omen. The expeditions themselves are quite complex in terms of the prioritization of how you should spend your daytime. Now, I have got a full video that goes through how you should prioritize your days and things that you should do. I don't want to cover all of that here, so I will recommend you go and watch that video, but just a couple of things to think about here more generally is pathways on your run. So when you're still in the air about to land, bring up the map and have a think about where you're about to land and those first couple locations you can go. And then whenever you complete a location, you really want to know exactly what direction you are going, because you have such a limited time to do things. And the more runs you do, the more understanding you'll get of these specific things that are on the map, where you can find all the spirit jumps, where you can find the spectral hawks, as well as the general pathway that you should be taking. And do things like the mine. I know in the network test, mines and Everjails weren't really worth it, but every mine will have a boss at the end. For one, it's a troll. For one, it is a pumpkinhead, and the other is just like a carrion knight. Essentially, when you defeat these, you'll get a smithing stone 2 every single time, which is fantastic, because in some cases, if your run is just not going well, you've got a smithing stone 2 that you can use to just upgrade your main weapon all the way to epic. So you've got a purple weapon that you can take with you into the final boss or wherever you're at. And I would always recommend to check the merchant stock on every single run, as merchants will have smithing stone 1, so you can get your weapon to blue, but also other weapons that you can buy. And most of the expeditions will have a unique village that will contain like an upgraded merchant that you can buy a massive amount of weapons and different like really powerful talismans and things from. And in a lot of cases, these will actually have a weapon that matches the boss's weakness. More on that in a little bit later in this video, but it's very important to match those bosses' weaknesses. Another thing is often it's quicker to ignore the trash enemies and just wipe the bosses, collect those runes, collect the rewards, and keep going going. Fighting trash enemies, especially in day 2, is a complete waste of time, so just ignore them and keep running through. Now, each day lasts for exactly 14 minutes before that final boss will basically spawn. So from the second you land, you have 4.5 minutes until that first circle starts to close and the night's tide grows closer. This circle takes 3 minutes to close completely, and then you're in that next circle, which is a smaller space of the map, for another 3.5 minutes. At that point, the circle will begin to close again onto that final location, and you have 3 minutes to reach that final location before that boss will spawn, and then that exact same cycle will happen for day 2. So you don't have as much time in the zone as you think you do, but knowing how long you have, and if you want to time it, you absolutely can, will help you think about where you should be going and where you should be spending your time. And definitely, if you find bosses that just have way too much health, like gargoyles or things that are just really cumbersome to fight, often dragons are a little bit, just completely ignore them and move on, especially in solo runs. You don't want to be fighting things that are going to take you that entire 3 minutes just to kill one thing. It's best to just clean up what you can, move on and go and kill 2 bosses rather than just kill 1, because you get more runes from doing that. You'll also need to make a lot of split decisions about your gear. And I think this really comes down to a couple of categories, but ultimately it comes down to a few things. But also never be afraid to just leave a boss reward if there is literally nothing for you. It's better to just leave it. I know it feels bad, but you don't want to make your build worse. Firstly, the one thing I look for is a weapon that I can actively use as my main weapon. If the reward doesn't have one of those, I'll read the passive buffs that the drop has. Or in some cases, it might just be a general passive that increases your HP or something, not necessarily a weapon that has a passive effect that is valuable. If there is nothing there that's valuable for my build, I will look to see if there is a weapon or a passive that's beneficial to someone else in my team. For example, if a weapon drops that has increased ranged weapon attack power, and I've got an Iron Eye with me, I will typically grab that item and then give that to the Iron Eye, because obviously they want to use ranged weapons and they get additional benefits from that. You need to make these choices quite fast, as we've touched on, because the longer you spend looking at your gear and like tinkering, be like, oh, should I grab this or this? You're essentially wasting time to get to that next boss and get more runes and continue leveling up. And by the time you stand standing there umming and ahhing about something that may not actually help you, you could have cleared a boss that actually gives you something valuable. So consider just grabbing items, and then while you're sprinting to that next point of interest, tweaking your inventory and being like, oh, should I change this, drop this, grab this, do whatever, so you're not then wasting time just standing there. The last one I have for you is quite a big one, and that is weaknesses. Weaknesses are so much more beneficial in Elden Ring Nightreign than they were in Elden Ring. Firstly, all the nightlords have weaknesses, and you can view them when you're looking at the nightlord expedition screen when you're choosing who you're going to go and try and fight. The effective and that icon indicates to you what their weaknesses are. So when you're on that expedition run, you want to try and find weapons that match that weakness. Alternatively, you could actually put on a relic onto your nightfarer that actually starts your starting weapon with that specific weakness. For example, if it's holy for the first boss, there are relics that will add holy to your starting armament, which then matches that weakness already, but ultimately you do want to try and find one that is better while you're on those runs. When you do hit nightlords matching their weakness, there is a certain different sound that will play, but also once you hit them enough, they will stagger and often knock themselves out of certain attacks, or even prevent them from doing certain attacks because they're, say, gone mad because they're weak to madness, or you've poisoned them and they won't use certain types of attacks. What happens to the nightlords is different depending on that nightlord, but regardless, they all have a weakness, and you definitely want to match that. Some of them, it will just lower their damage negation and also their attack power. Some of them, it completely changes their mechanics or prevents them from doing things, knocks them out of attacks. Very beneficial to match these weaknesses. It will significantly improve your runs, I am telling you, because that is the main thing that I learned that I was originally making a mistake with quite early in my runs. But that is all I've got for you today. If you want to learn more about runs specifically, go and watch my run guide. But thank you for watching this video till the end. Thank you to our members for supporting the channel. My name is Norza, and I hope you have a great day.